In April 1917, the French army witnessed one of the most demoralizing situations in military history. French morale was destroyed by the Second Battle of the Aisne and the failed Nivelle offensive, as well as the fact that by spring of 1917, there were over 1 million dead French soldiers. Additionally, French troops had unrealistic expectations for the American arrival in France, as a surprising amount of them thought that the U.S. troops would be arriving within days of the American declaration of war. These were the French army mutinies, and they would be kept secret from the public and, more importantly, the Germans, whose intelligence really dropped the ball on picking up anything about the mutinies. Like, they didn't even know about it at all. 3,400 French troops would be court-martialed, 554 mutineers would be sentenced to death, and 26 of them were executed. The French historical military records of the mutinies would remain secret until 1967, 50 years later, and with more information about the mutinies being released in 2017, 100 years later. With these facts in mind, today's alternate history video asks the question, what if France dropped out of the Great War in 1917 as a result of the mutinies? As usual, conditions for why France remained at war against the odds will be examined first, so we know what is going to have to be changed in order to create this scenario, and then we will analyze how those changes will affect our alternate history video. In order for France to drop out, first, the mutinies will need to be more publicized or at least leaked to the public to further demoralize the French army. But more importantly, this leak will allow for the German intelligence to know about the mutinies and embolden the German High Command to launch an offensive into France using troops transferred from the Eastern Front. It's possible that the Germans might seek to repeat the Russian Revolution in France, but that's not something that we're going to get into here. Another change that we're going to make is if the Americans are delayed arriving in France or even not in the war, as all the French were willing to do was fight on the defensive and not go on the offensive without American troops in Europe. To keep it as close to our timeline as possible, we'll have America still enter the war, but come in a few months later, or at least have their forces be delayed by a few months. This will make French forces be in despair for a few more months than in our timeline and escalate the exponential decline of French morale. Honestly, I feel like those two conditions are enough to change to create our scenario. Now, with that in mind, Germany overwhelms France in an offensive in summer of 1917, and France is forced to drop out of the war and surrender. Germany will likely see this as the climactic end to the Western Front and send forces to stabilize the Italian, Macedonian, and Eastern fronts. Germany would negotiate with Britain to get the British to lift the blockade in exchange for less British reparations to the Germans. Germany would take territory, with the Entente completely losing the war in Europe to the Central Powers after the fall of Russia. Germany gains territory in Africa to create Middle Africa, but only really the Belgian Congo, Gabon, Angola, and the French Congo. Again, Germany is being a little nicer to the British due to lifting the blockade, which was starving Germany, and this was done in exchange for a British surrender. A counternote that I will make here is that it is possible for the Germans to want a little more from the British due to the blockade, but I don't really see that happening. However, this is alternate history and we will never know what actually would have happened. The point is, Germany is not going to be nice to France at all, as, they have France at gunpoint and will want to seize some land from Portugal for joining the Entente. The Ottoman Empire is still defeated by the British for various reasons that I won't get into here in this video, but the point is that just because Germany wins in Europe doesn't mean that the Central Powers will win the war. The Ottomans were going to fall anyway, and just because France capitulates doesn't mean that Britain would just ignore the Middle East campaign completely. One main change that does happen, though, is that France cannot take place in the Sykes-Picot Agreement, and it's completely unknown what would happen to the post-war Middle East with a singular British victory over the Ottoman Empire. As for Austria-Hungary, the empire becomes the Federation of the United States of Austria-Hungary if it doesn't completely collapse at the end of this alternate war in 1917. Although it's not 1918, Austria-Hungary was going to collapse anyway. And in order for the empire to remain, they would need German military support, as the Austro-Hungarian military would be completely done by the end of 1917, pretty much as they were in 1918. How the reform of the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire affects Italy, the Balkans, and other states that spawned from the corpse of the empire would be too difficult to predict based on the conditions that are given. However, one thing that I'll note here is that Italy may not receive super nice treatment from Germany, as Italy technically betrayed the Central Powers in the war. Turning to the Balkans, Bulgaria would get land from Serbia, Greece, and Romania, as Bulgaria performed fantastically during the war against all odds. Good job, Bulgaria. That's all that we're going to talk about in the Balkans, because I don't want to start World War III in this video. The United States is blamed for the French mutinies by whatever remains of the pre-war French government due to the late arrival of American forces or not even coming into the war. America would have been unable to send troops to Europe in this alternate timeline, and the American public is mad at Germany for various reasons, such as U-boat sinkings of ships and the Zimmermann telegram, but the Americans can't really do much about that with the French withdrawal. This is something that would affect America for the next possible war that comes. Effects on American politics at home and foreign policy are difficult to predict in this scenario as there are many moving pieces. First of all, if America had entered the war later or not come in at all, American politics would be very different in completely different ways. But the main point is that America is not on track to become a global superpower as it was in our timeline. A rising power? You bet, but the track is completely slowed down as the world is set to remain a multipolar world for the foreseeable future, with alternate peace terms set on the Entente and a German victory having occurred. And it's not completely known what would happen in alternate Britain and alternate France and all of these different governments that have formed. One thing that is for sure, though, in this alternate timeline is that Eastern Europe and Russia is in a complete mess, and it's kind of Germany's responsibility to deal with this as the Entente and Allied powers have their own problems to deal with at home as they had lost the war. And Germany has won the war, so Eastern Europe would be ripe for the pickings for how Germany would like to run it. This is, of course, just one possible scenario for if the French dropped out of the war in 1917 as a result of the French mutinies. What do you think would have happened had France dropped out of World War I at this time under these conditions? Write in the comments below, and thank you for watching.